Hey guys, this is Johnny and this is the final video for the third-person shooter tutorial series. In this video I'm gonna add some audio and visual effects for the shooting mechanics and also a dynamic crosshair with randomized bullet spread that changes when the player moves or aims. But before all the good stuff, I'm gonna fix some things from the previous video. In the radial menu, I'm gonna delete the panel to create some better visuals with blur effects. For that, I'm gonna add a texture rect and make it full rect. I'm gonna call it blur. Here I'm going to attach a white 2x2 image that I created and make it expand so it covers the whole screen. I'm going to add a new shader material and add a new visual shader, and the mode will be canvas item. To create a blur effect, I'm simply going to add this texture node and make this screen. I'm going to bring the screen UV and screen texture and attach them here. And here I'm going to create a scalar uniform and attach it to the LOD input. I'm going to call this blur amount as this is going to determine how much the blur will be. If I connect this to color and increase the value here, you can see it's already making the screen blurry. I'm also going to darken the screen a little bit. So I'm going to add a color constant and a color up here. I'm going to make this hard light and make the color dark gray. I'm going to move this behind the circle so the circle doesn't get blurred. Here in the zoom animation where the circle gets bigger, I'm going to animate the blur amount of the shader. So you can see the screen gets blurred and the color gets darkened so it looks more pleasing. I'm also going to fix some bugs I found in the previous one. I'm going to create this logic here, so if the player has no weapon, regardless of what weapon we choose, we're going to change from holster state and weapon state and immediately switch to the weapon. And if we switch to the current weapon while we have weapon, the switch function will not work. I created some simple weapon sound effects using Audacity and LMMS, which I'm going to include in the project files. I imported the audio files in the project, and here I'm going to create an array to hold the audio files. I'm also going to create a new input for weapon fire, which is the left mouse click. Here I'm going to modify this logic so that if we are pressing the aim button or the fire button, we enter this block. I'm going to create a new timer called shoot timer with this wait time. This will later be changed with the fire rate of the weapon. Here when we are pressing fire, if the shoot timer is stopped, and the reload animation is not active, I'm going to start the timer, and this way this block is going to be called with a delay. I'm going to add an audio stream player for the shooting sound effects, and here I'm going to take a new audio stream random pitch so that the weapon fire sound pitch is randomized and doesn't sound repetitive. I'm going to keep the default settings which work pretty well. And here I'm going to access the audio stream and assign the audio for the current weapon. In the next line I'm going to play the sound. So I'm pressing the fire button right now and you can see the sounds for each weapon are playing nicely. But when I press the fire button without aiming, the camera zoom animation is playing. To fix that I'm going to modify the code for the aim mode. But before that I'm going to simplify the camera animations. For that I'm going to take this aim animation into the animation tree. I'm going to duplicate the aim animation and make it aim cancel and keep the original as aim animation. Here I'm going to add the aim animation with the other ones. I'm going to create a blend space 1D with 0 to 1 range, and in position 0 I'm going to add the aim cancel animation, and in position 1 I'm going to add the aim animation. For the sake of simplicity, I also converted the crouch stand nodes as blend space 1D where 0 is crouch and 1 is stand. I'm going to update the corresponding variables in the code. And in here when we are pressing the aim button, while the roll is not active and the player has weapon, I'm going to lerp the camera zoom animation towards 1 or else this will be 0. I'm also going to reset the speed for the cam animation as we don't need this now. And I'm going to use this variable for the interpolation of the camera zoom animation. So now you can see pressing the fire button does not zoom the camera. But you can see there is a problem here. If I spam the fire button while moving in a different direction, the animation looks weird. To fix this, we simply need to make the player keep aiming for a duration after a shot. To do that, I'm going to create a new timer and call this aim stay delay. In here, I'm going to check if the timer is stopped and start the timer every time we fire a shot. So you can see the player is staying in the aiming state for a while after we fire a shot. So now I'm going to create a new node which will contain the weapon sets of the player. I'm going to create a new script for this, and I went ahead and created all these properties for each weapons in dictionary format. I created a separate node for this so the player script doesn't get cluttered, as we can have stats for many weapons here. In here, mag decrement reduces 1 bullet in the mag, which we'll need for every shot, and the mag fill function fills up the magazine. Here the empty space of the magazine is calculated, and that is taken from the ammo backup and given to the mag. And if the ammo backup is less than the empty space, the whole ammo goes into the mag. And this ammo refill function just fills up the mag and the ammo backup to their maximum value. And here are all the getter functions for the weapon stats. So now I'm going to create a new variable called fired once for the non-automatic weapons. Here, when the fire button is released, I'm going to make this false. And in here, I'm going to create a new logic so that if the weapon is not auto and we already fired once, the shooting will be stopped. Here I'm just going to make this true after we fire a shot. I'm also going to decrement a bullet from the mag, and here the duration of the shoot timer will be 1 divided by the fire rate of the weapon. This way, if the fire rate is 2, the duration will be 0.5, which means exactly 2 shots will be fired in 1 second. For the weapon switching mechanism, I created 2 new animations for rifle and pistol. In the animation tree, I'm going to create a one-shot node and call it weapon switch. I'm going to create a timescale for the switching speed, and here I'm going to create a seek node which we would need to restart the weapon switching animation. I'm going to create a blend space 1D for each of the weapons, where 0 is rifle and 1 is pistol. I'm also going to filter all the bones from shoulder to hand. In here, when we are firing a shot, I'm going to create a new logic so that we cannot fire when switching weapon. Down here, I'm going to change the weapon switching animation to the current weapon. Here I'm going to make this weapon switch and set the scale of the animation as the switch speed of the current weapon. I'm also going to make the seek position 0 so that the weapon switching animation restarts even if we switch the weapon in the middle of the animation. So you can see the weapon switching animation plays when we switch the weapon. So now I'm going to create a control node and call this UI and make it full rect, and here I created a simple UI to show the ammo. I'm going to create another control node which will be the crosshair. I'm going to make this centered on the screen. I'm going to create a node 2D and call this center and create a line 2D here. I'm going to create 2 points very close to each other and make both of the caps round so it becomes a circle. I'm going to duplicate it and create a lighter and smaller version of this so the previous one becomes the border. I'm going to create another node 2D for the reticle and another one for the lines. I'm going to create a line pivot and a line base and bring the border and the dot here and rename this as line. The line will be 10 units long. I'm going to create an animation player inside the line pivot, and with this fire animation, I'm going to animate the X position of the border node. So the line will move like this for every shot. I'm also going to create some easing for the animation. I'm going to move the line base a little, and then I'm going to save the line pivot as a separate scene. I'm going to duplicate this 3 times and rotate each one holding control, which would create a crosshair with 4 lines. I created a script for the crosshair node, and here I have a variable for the X position of the line base. I'm going to create a function called fire which takes a speed parameter, and here I'm going to run a loop so that for every line the fire animation plays with the speed. I call the stop function so that it starts from the beginning every time it gets called. In the process function, I'm going to access all the line bases and make their X position lerp towards the variable I created. In the player script, I'm simply going to call the fire function of the crosshair node and give the fire rate multiplied by 0.2 as the parameter. This way the crosshair animation is slower than the fire rate, which looks more pleasing to the eyes. So this is how it looks every time you fire a shot. So now I'm going to make the crosshair dynamic so that it gets bigger when the player runs and smaller when the player crouches or aims. For that I'm going to modify the posX variable of the crosshair. I'm going to add the spread variable with the movement spread multiplied by the velocity length and the jump spread multiplied by the integer conversion of the isOnFloor function. This way we get a constant spread if the player is jumping and a dynamic spread when the player is moving. I'm also going to add the aim spread multiplied by the value of the cam aim node in the cam anim tree and the crouch spread multiplied by the crouch stand target. This way the spread is changed when we are aiming or crouching. You can modify the values for each weapon to get the desired behavior. So you can see the crosshair gets larger with the velocity and even larger when the player jumps. Aiming and crouching also changes the spread, and all the values are different for rifle and pistol. So now I'm going to create some visual effects for the shooting mechanism. I created a flame image using filters in Inkscape, which I'm going to use for the muzzle flash. In the skeleton, I'm going to create a new bone attachment and call it neck attachment, and the bone is going to be the neck bone. I'm going to add a particle node and call this muzzle flash. I'm going to make the amount 1 and speed this up for now. Keep in mind that the speeds will be changed with the weapon stats. I'm going to create a quad mesh with the flame texture, and I'm going to make it transparent and unshaded and set the blend mode as add. I'm also going to make it particle billboard so it always faces the camera. I'm going to reposition it and create a process material. I'm going to make the gravity 0 and angle completely randomized and scale it down a little bit. I'm going to create an animation player, and with the muzzle flash animation, I'm going to animate the visibility of the muzzle flash node. I found that animating the visibility instead of the emitting function gives a better performance, as this is going to be a very fast animation. You can see it's already looking good. I'm going to create another particle and call it streaks and create a long mesh like this. I'm going to play the skeleton icon so it's steady, and I'm going to reposition the particle. I'm going to give it a yellow color for albedo and emission. I'm also going to make the gravity towards negative z-axis, as I'm going to use the lookat function for this particle later, which uses the negative z-axis. I'm going to create a curve for the scale and reposition it again so it looks like the streaks are coming from the weapon. I'm going to turn off the cast shadow for this, and in the animation player I'm going to animate the visibility for this one as well. But instead of turning it off in the middle, I'm going to turn it off in the end, so that it looks continuous and turns off when we are not shooting. Now I'm going to add an omelet light with a range of 15 and give it a yellowish color and turn on the shadow. I'm going to animate its visibility like the muzzle flash and reposition this over here. So you can see it's already looking very good. And this is how it looks in the main scene with the glow enabled. In the player script, I'm going to create another variable to reference the neck attachment node. Here, when we are firing a shot, I'm going to access the animation player of the neck attachment and give it a speed of the fire rate. I'm also going to clamp this between 5 to 10 so that it doesn't look bad if the fire rate is too high or too low. In the next line, I'm going to play the muzzle flash animation. Down here, when we are switching the weapon, I'm going to set the speed scale of the muzzle flash particle as the fire rate and the streaks particle slightly lower than the fire rate, and set the gravity like this. I found these values to work very nice for the rifle and pistol, but you can play around with this. So you can see the muzzle flash and the streaks are coming off when we fire. But you will notice the streaks are not going towards the center of the screen. For that, I created a raycast as a child of the camera, and I'm gonna cast this to very far in the z-axis and position it like this. In the player script, I'm gonna reference that as weapon ray, and in here, I'm gonna create a vector3 variable called weapon ray tip. At the very bottom of the physics process function, I'm gonna create a logic so that if the weapon ray is colliding and the collision distance is not very close, I'm gonna assign the collision point to the weapon ray tip. Else the weapon ray tip will be the farthest point of the weapon ray. I'm also going to make the streaks node look at the weapon ray tip. So now you can see the streaks are going towards the center of the screen. I'm also going to create some splatter effect, and for that I'm going to create a spatial and call it Splatters. Here I'm going to add a particle with amount 12 and explosiveness 1 and speed scale 2. I'm going to create a small cube for this and make it red. I'm going to bring this forward so it's easy to see. I'm going to create a particles material with direction 1 in the y direction and some initial velocity and random velocity. I'm also going to make this one shot and save this as a separate scene, and I'm going to make 15 copies of this node. In the player script, I'm going to create a new variable called splatter and make it 0. And here when we are firing a shot, I'm going to access a particle from the splatters and set its position at the weapon ray tip. And in the next line, I'm going to set the emitting as true. I'm also going to increment the splatter variable for every shot, and if the variable gets out of the range, I'm going to set it to 0. So this is actually a pooling system for the splatter particles. Instead of this, you could create and destroy the particle for every shot, which usually in Godot gives no performance issue. But I think it's a good practice if you use pooling, which is a widely used system in all the game engines. So you can see the splatters are coming from where the weapon ray is colliding. But you will notice the splatters are coming from the center, as there are no bullet spread mechanism right now. To make the bullet spread, I'm simply going to modify the rotation of the weapon ray. I'm going to create a variable spread and assign the pos x divided by a value. And here I'm going to randomize x and y rotations of the weapon ray and the range of the spread variable. So the weapon ray would rotate inside a specific zone depending on the size of the crosshair. I'm also going to create a recoil effect by simply rotating the V node by the amount of the weapon's recoil, and call a function in the cam root node called recoil recovery. What this function does is, it modifies the cam root V variable with half of the weapon's recoil. So after each shot, the weapon will suddenly go upwards and then slowly come towards the half of the distance. So you can see the recoil is working pretty well, and also the bullets are spreading wide when we move, and it becomes narrow when we aim or crouch. So lastly, I'm going to make some reload mechanics. For that, I'm going to create a timer, and the wait time doesn't matter as it will depend on the weapon stats. I'm going to connect the timeout signal with the player script, and here I'm just going to call the mag field function in the weapon stats that I described before. Here I'm going to create a reload function, and the reload will work if the magazine is not full and the ammo backup is not 0. Here I'm going to set the reload scale as the reload speed of the weapon and make the reload active true. And I'm going to start the reload timer with the duration of 1 divided by the reload speed. I'm going to create a new input R for reload, and when the reload button is pressed, I'm simply going to call the reload function. And here in the physics process, if the mag is empty and the reload timer is stopped, and the roll is not active, I'm going to call the reload function. Also in the roll function, I'm going to disable the reload animation and stop the reload timer, and I'm going to do the same down here in the switch weapon function. I'm also going to access the mag and ammo backup labels in the UI and show the values of the current weapon there. I'm also going to move all these lines down at the bottom of the physics process, which makes more sense. So now you can see the ammo is running out and we can reload the ammo. I also created a scene to fill up the ammo of the player. If the player enters the area, it just calls the ammo refill function for the defined ammo type. So now we can refill the ammo when it runs out. So that's it guys, this is the third-person shooter demo, and I'm gonna put the link for this project in the description. If you've liked this series, you can subscribe for my future projects, and also you can consider supporting me on Patreon. And I'm really thankful to the amazing people who are supporting my works. So I hope you enjoyed this series. Thank you for watching.